Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, class. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good midnight, whatever time that you're accessing this recorded video of lesson 2 of your Understanding the Self subject. Before anything else, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to do this class through a recorded video. May Allah reward you with His mercy and blessings for the kindness that you've imparted to me. Ameen. Our previous lesson was the philosophical perspectives of the self. Great thinkers across human civilization such as Socrates, Kant, Locke, Hume, Merleau-Ponty came up with concepts of the self, and mostly these concepts were products of the inquisitiveness of their minds. It was an exercise of their thinking, of their analysis. As you can see or remember, these concepts were highly based on their own personal beliefs, personal inclinations on religion, morality, ethics, and politics and culture. And now, in this second lesson, we will be trying to figure out how the self is understood in relation to society, to his culture, to his family, and how these external environments, macro environments, highly determine the understanding of the self. These are the sociological perspectives of the self, and these are highly based on theories that have been used in several empirical studies on sociology, anthropology, culture, and even psychology. Okay, so unlike the philosophical perspectives, these are not just products of thinking, but these are products of research, methodological research. So I hope that you spend your time listening and learning with sincerity once again in this recorded video. We may not be together, we may not have our regular classes, but I'd like you to remind you to still do your meditations, your breathing exercises, and your intention setting before this video, before we go into the meat of this topic, so that we are just prepared, we are just ready to take in what is good from this and to process it to be good for us too. The sociological perspectives on the self differ from the philosophical perspectives in a number of manners and degrees. Aside from the development of their concepts of themselves, there are also certain principles that are really different from the philosophical perspectives. First and foremost, in the philosophical perspective, the self seemed to be an inherent, inborn facet of the human being. It seems like people came with the self. We have the mind-body dualism, body and soul dualism. So it was thought in the philosophical perspective that people were born with the self and it was present at birth. Even some said that it was the source of consciousness. But in the sociological perspectives of the self, this is not the case. According to proponents of sociological understanding of the self is not present from birth. So we are not born with this sense of self, with this idea of the self. but we manage to develop, create this self from our social experiences. So as we interact with the world around us, with people around us, we also get to develop this self. Of course, this understanding of the self would differ from one theory to another. However, common to these theories is the principle that the way that we make sense of who we are, that we understand ourselves, is largely determined or derived from interactions with other human beings, groups, and institutions. So this really fortifies, seals the idea that no man is an island, because we cannot exist and come up with the concept of selfhood without being with another person. Not just one person, but an entire system of human beings, of society and community. That is the sociological perspective of the self. And later on, we will find out how these perspectives differ from one another. Before we try to delve into the various sociological perspectives on the self, let us first try to define the basic characteristics of the self according to contemporary literature, meaning what is the agreed upon characteristic of the self. So according to Stevens in 1996, the self is separate, self-contained, independent, consistent, unitary, and private. When you say that the self is separate, natatangi, naiiba, nag-iisa, diba po? Ibig sabihin, the self is distinct, it is special, it is unique, it has its own individuality. That is why even twins who shared a womb for 9 months and basically have the same DNA, they're also very different. They are not exactly alike, even if their bodies may look the same, right? For identical twins, it is the idea or reality that the self is separate. The self is also self-contained and independent, meaning the self can exist on its own. In the sociological perspective, we say that the self is not present from birth and it's defined by social experiences. The idea of the self cannot exist without others, but the existence of the self, it is there. One person is independent from another. One person doesn't really need another to exist, right? To live, to survive, to have meaning in life, yes, you need another person. But to experience your own thoughts and characteristics, you don't need another person. People, the self, is independent. It has its own volition. It is the agent of its own action. And it is the one that decides its thoughts, feelings, and emotions. The self also is consistent, meaning we have our consistent habitual habits, and that our personality, the way that we react to things, the way that we respond to events, our traits, our characteristics are enduring. Who we are when we are children are basically the same people with who we are right now. There may be changes as response to the things that happen to us, but the core of our personalities are more or less the same. That is why the self is consistent. The self also is unitary because it is the essence of the person. Everything that occurs to the person, his thoughts, his experiences, his feelings, his behavior run through the self. If I try to explain the idea of the self as unitary, I think one of the best explanations that I could give to you, class, is the self is the means and ends of our actions, meaning we are able to do our actions because of the self, but at the end of the day, the one who benefits or who gets harmed by our actions is also the self. A similar conceptualization of the self being unitary is the idea that all experiences are embodied experiences. When you experience something, it is not only the soul that experiences it, but it's the mind, the body, and the soul. Your body, your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions are all into the experience. So the self is unitary. And lastly, finally, the self is private. We do not share everything to everyone. We have our innermost thoughts and feelings, our own judgments, how we process our thoughts and feelings, how we intend our actions, decide upon our choices. These are very private processes. And sometimes, even if we want to tell others about it, it's hard to put it into words, and it just proves that the self is a private entity. And I think in these definitions, you already see the strengths of having a coherent understanding of the self. Sa idea pa lang that the self is private means that we are not supposed to share everything about ourselves to everyone, that we are not entitled also to explain our actions to everyone. We have this culture right now of not only advertising everything and expressing everything, but also being sorry for everything. But the idea that the self is private, hindi mo kailangang ipaliwanag lahat ng actions mo to everyone because it's something for you, it's something from you, and something that you should keep within you too. Okay, so these are the 6 basic characteristics of the self: separate, self-contained, independent, consistent, unitary, and private. Now that we have defined the basic characteristics of the self, let us tackle the first theory, first sociological perspective on the self. We call it the social constructivist perspective. A while ago, we said that the self is independent, that it is private, that it is consistent. So the principles or the ideas that we will be tackling in this social constructivist perspective might sound to be in conflict with the original definition of the self. So I'd like to make some clarifications. Although the self is independent, although it is consistent, and although it is private, the self does not exist in isolation. It does not live in isolation. It lives within a social context. Therefore, the social constructivist perspective argues that there should be a merged view of the person and their social context. So we should not see the person separate or isolated from their external world, from their social experiences, because the self is actually constructed, is actually experienced through our social interactions, to our external world. In fact, the self is always in communication, always colliding, always struggling with the external reality. It struggles with the demands of external reality. It struggles with the expectations, with the voices of the external reality, with the pressure of the external reality. Therefore, the self always responds and reacts to its outside world, to the world outside it. Hence, so the social constructivist perspective tells us that the self is not static. It's not rigid. It doesn't fight, or it doesn't just neglect the influence from its external world. In fact, it responds to it. It struggles with it, but it also morphs and fits itself into any external circumstances that it finds itself. Meaning, class, yung self, nag-a-adjust siya, nagiging flexible siya, hindi siya rigid, hindi siya matigas ang ulo, hindi naman. Hindi siya matatawag mong hindi possible magbago. Possible magbago ang self depending on the situation. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's say right now you are a working student, that you are also the eldest sibling or child in your family, and let's say that your parents are hardworking, but you're trying to make ends meet. Okay? So I'm going to give you 4 settings. Sa bahay, at home, you are the eldest sibling and you are, let's say, the kuya. And as a kuya, there are expectations of you. You have to be more responsible than your siblings. Maybe you are tasked to take care of your siblings. So as a kuya, your siblings may see you as someone they fear, someone they respect, someone that they have to follow. Okay? And then we also said that because your family has to make ends meet, you have to work. So at work, maybe you're the youngest because you're a student. And maybe because you're the youngest, you're really at the bottom of the hierarchy. So at work, you're supposed to follow people instead of people following you. So wala ning authority mo as a kuya. But then let's say, in the class or in school, you are someone admired by people because you're good at something. Maybe you are in the dance troupe and you are the leader of the dance troupe, and people gush over you. People admire you for your talent, and you also enjoy the respect and adoration of your co-dancers, of your members of your dance group. But because you're already working, you're also busy in class, in your dance group, you're also busy in your role as a eldest brother at home, pwedeng sa classroom, medyo kalma ka lang. Okay, you don't really participate, you just give the bare minimum because you have other areas in your life that you're busy with. So as you see, in different settings, there would be different expectations of you. So you play very different roles. And you tend to have very different characteristics in accordance to the roles that you have. Okay? But it doesn't mean that there are different yous in those situations. It's just you proving that you are multifaceted, that you can adjust in what the external circumstances ask of you. Okay? You just know where to put yourself. You know that you're good at dance, so you're focusing there. You know that you're needed at work, so you're focusing there. Not in school, and you know that it's okay just to give what you can in school as long as you pass. Okay? So, depende yung self natin kung anong kinakailangan sa atin ng environment. And that is a proof that people are so intelligent, so powerful, that they can tap into multiple facets in themselves and choose a facet that fits perfectly to the circumstances. Kaya, it's also a lesson to you from the social constructivist perspective that the situations that you are in may seem to be very difficult. Baka kala mo you're stuck na, kala mo nasa bottom ka na. But find the power of yourself to recreate itself, to find a facet of it that would help you overcome the situation too. Alright, the idea that you can be multifaceted and come up with adjustment in yourself depending on the social context may be in conflict with the idea that nag-iisa lang talagang identity mo, that your identity is enduring and consistent. Maybe this explanation by Marcel Mauss and French anthropologists could help you come up with an explanation of how is that possible. Na ikaw pa rin yung taong nag-a-adjust sa iba't ibang situation and you do not lose your identity in the process. Okay? So Marcel Mauss tells us that there are two phases of the self, the moi and the personne. The moi is your biological givenness. It is the way that you look, your body, your height, your weight, the color of your eyes, the color of your skin. These are things that is not dictated upon you. It's not influenced by other people, by your society, but it is who you are as you are born, who you are as you grew up. Okay? And the biological givenness, of course, it's also capable of being changed. Magsuot ka lang ng contact lens, mag-change na yung eyes mo. Magpapayat ka lang and maiiba na ang size ng waist mo. Of course, that is subject to change. But the idea here is this is who you are as you are. Okay? At the same time, the moi is also your sense of self, your personal sense of self. It is how you see yourself without the dictations of society, of the world around you. Okay? And this is very much dependent on yourself. Okay? And then we have the other one, the person. The person is yourself that is dependent on your social concepts of what it means to be who he is. So let's go back to our example a while ago. It could be that the person of you, the eldest son, who's also a student and a student employee and also a dance troupe member, is you have to be responsible, that you have to help your family, that you have to be good in dancing. So these are all coming from the outside of you, the external world. Nanggagaling siya kung anong sinasabi ng mga tao that you have to be. But your moi could be just someone who wants to enjoy dancing, someone who wants to enjoy music. That is what, and if all these dictations are going to stop for a moment, what you see yourself is someone who dances, who has fun and finds happiness in that. So do you get the difference? The moi is who you are according to you. The person is who you think you must be in accordance to the society, to the internalized demands and expectations of the society. So, ma'am, is it a conclusion that my actual self is the moi, and the person is not my actual self. Not really. Your person could be your way of responding to the social experiences that you have. Your person is your way of thriving with the circumstances that you are gifted with. It's not really in conflict with your moi. Okay, is that understood? Thank you. If you have questions, again, I would like to remind you that you could relay them to your class representative. Make no mistake of concluding that because the self or you try to adjust who you are based on what your social context demands from you, tells you to do, or influences you, it doesn't mean that you are a passive recipient of everything that your external world exposes you to. No, no. It is a fact, according to various studies like by Mead and by Vygotsky, that although you adjust to your environment, you are still the one actively organizing and actively participative of the shaping of the self. So you also choose on who you want to become in response to who you are, your givenness, your dispositions, your tendencies, and to the influence of your environment. So it's not automatic. It's not di ibig sabihin susundan mo na lang lahat ng nangyayari o anong influence man ng environment mo. No, it's not like that, class. You still have a say. You are still the agent of shaping yourself. And interestingly, one of the ways for you to be able to negotiate the becoming of yourself in relation to the influences of your social context is language. Amazing, right? Paano kaya yung language natutulungan ka para buuhin yung sarili mo? Okay, according to Vygotsky, language allows us to participate in our society. But first and foremost, language allows us to understand what the society is saying, and the dialogues that we hear from outside us is the one that we internalize and the one that we adopt as our own also. Okay? And that way we have the sense of who we should be. But because language is also something that comes naturally, no one really could give a definite answer of how we develop language. We are not taught word by word of how to do grammar, how to do syntax, right? So language is something that seems to come to us naturally, or the faculties that we need to understand language, to express language, to dialogue is something that seems to be natural. And because we understand through language and we communicate through language, language is a site where the individual and the social world, his social world, make and remake each other too. Therefore, because of language, we could also manipulate, not naman manipulate necessarily, affect our social world and be participative not only in the shaping of our own selves, but also in the development of the social world. Again, a reminder that the self is not static, it is dynamic, It is not passive, but it is also active. Your volition, meaning yung kakayahan mong pumili, yung kakayahan mong maging agent ng sarili mong kagustuhan, it would remain. You could assert it even if you try to respond and adjust to your social world. One of the theories that could explain how language mediates self-development, meaning how self-development or how we make sense of ourselves in relation to our social context could be done through language, is explained through symbolic interactionism by George Herbert Mead. According to Mr. Mead, communication is a way in which people make sense of their social worlds. In fact, he termed communication as a form of symbolic interaction. Of course, as we do in real life, we communicate through language and gestures. But these language are not just words or letters pieced together, but these words and actions actually mean something beyond their appearances, beyond their latent meaning, because as social individuals we have these shared symbols and meanings attached to it. So the shared symbols and meanings that we have attached to these words, language, and gestures and signs is really the one that shapes our social life. And because we have these meanings and symbols that help us maneuver and interact with one another, Mead tells us that every interaction that we have at any level, macro level, micro level, intimate, public, private, with another person, is also responsible for forming the self and for us to make sense of the self in relation to our social context. In fact, we know that communication is an exchange of these symbols and meanings, that when we communicate with another person, we don't just listen to the person or we just don't relay what we want to say, but there is also this active thinking of what is this person going to say. Therefore, it also tells us that language, gestures, verbal and non-verbal, changes meaning according to certain contexts, right? What could be an example? For example, you are an anime enthusiast. You are a manga reader. And if I'm not mistaken, what is popular among fans of manga and anime is cosplay, right? You try to dress up according or like the characters that you read and watch in these manga and anime or Chinese, Korean, Japanese animated books they call it books nowadays, I'm not so sure, animated shows. Anyway, so cosplay is trying to dress up like them. And when you are with people who have the same interests as you are, you really don't need to explain why you're dressed that way, right? Because they understand you. They understand your gestures. They speak the same language that you do. You share the same meanings and symbols in what you are doing. But if you are dressed as an anime character and bigla kang naglakad sa Comcent or bigla kang naglakad sa Ground Zero, people would not understand you because they don't know why you're doing that. They don't know what you mean by doing that. So that is how we exchange meanings through our language and gestures. And that is also how we form our views of the self. Okay? Let me explain more clearly. Let me try to explain how our communication with one another helps us develop our views of not only of the social world, but of ourselves in relation to our social world. Of course, as social beings, every day we interact with one another, we communicate with one another. It is how we build, form, maintain, and preserve our society, our social systems. And as we communicate in various levels in the society, we also have shared symbols. Okay? Shared symbols, for example, you see a red circular sign in a white background. Immediately, you would know it's a stop sign, right? Or, for example, you see BTS, okay? If you are a fan of K-pop, you would say, "Oi, that is BTS like the group," right? But if you're not a fan of K-pop, you would say BTS behind the scene. So you see, guys, in different contexts, the meanings of the symbols that we use also changes. Anyway, as we continue to communicate with one another and have these shared symbols, the symbols also have gain or will gain their established meanings. And from these established meanings, we develop our views of ourselves. Okay? And that is so symbolic interactionism. That in every level of interaction, for every exchange of symbols and meanings through language and gestures, we develop views from our social world that we also internalize that somehow help us make sense of the social world and also of ourselves. From his theory of symbolic interactionism, Mead also came up with the conclusion that the self is the product of social experience. Okay? But he mentioned two facets of the self too, similar to the moi and person of mass. Okay? According to him, the process of developing the self is also the ongoing process of combining the I and the me. So he plays a difference between the I and the me. For him, the I pertains to the subjective self. It is spontaneous, it is unpredictable, and it is unorganized. Okay, it comes from our gut, our intuition. It comes from our impulse. Okay, it is not guarded. It is not limited. It is not policed by our society, by social expectations. Okay, it is who we are without inhibitions, reservations, and restrictions. Okay? And me is the objective self. It is the one that is derived from interaction with others. There could be various ways wherein your I will be in conflict in the objective self, and that is not necessarily wrong, but it could be a cause of conflict. Therefore, Mead said that there should be a process of combining the I and the me. When you say you combine the I and the me, you just don't put them together and that's it. What you do is you find a compromise wherein the I could function or could exist in harmony with the me, meaning you accept your I despite what you think should be me. Okay? There should be no conflict if you try to put these two together harmoniously. What could be an example? There are plenty of examples. So, for example, you are a student, once again, and there is so many expectations of you as a student. And one of those is that you study well, right? And you derive that from your interaction with various people. Your parents would tell you, anak, mag-aral ka na mabuti, hindi madaling paaralin ka. So, the objective self derived from that interaction would tell you, you should be a good student. Your teachers would tell you that the opportunity of learning is a privilege, so maximize that privilege. And that would tell you to be a good student, to maximize the opportunities that you have. That is the me. That is your objective self, the good, diligent student. But it could be that your I is different from that. Your I is someone who doesn't like studying, someone who doesn't have the patience to read and listen to your study materials and references. It could be because we are not perfect. But what is important is you're able to find a compromise in that. Because your me says that you have to be a good student, that is your objective self, then you should push your I to at least study more. You should push your I to find something that could motivate the I to enjoy studying. That is how you combine the I and me and find harmony between the two. The looking glass self is another sociological perspective that tells us how we could build our self-concept based on our social experiences. But this one is a bit tricky, and it is also my favorite in these theories, and it's also very true, I think, but this is just my personal opinion. Okay, so what is the looking glass self? It is a perspective that tells us that we form our self-concepts based on how we believe others perceive and evaluate us. Okay, so it might look like at first glance that our self-concepts come from other people. But if you look back into the definition again, it tells us how we believe others perceive and evaluate us. So, in other words, at the end of the day, the core of the self-concept is your beliefs, your perceptions, your assumptions about how others judge you. Okay, let me try to explain how that could happen step by step. So step one, you would imagine that how you look or how you appear to other people. Okay? And then you imagine who are these people and judge them too. And based on your judgment of them, you try to assume, you try to analyze how they see you. Okay. So, for example, you're going to, you want to join an organization. Let's say, what's a popular organization? Mindanao Varsitarian, is that the school media, right? Publication? Okay, so you want to apply to the school publication. And before you apply to that organization or publication, of course, you have to prepare yourself for interviews, for selection process, so on and so forth. And as you do that, it's common that we try to perceive first how others will take us, okay? How others will judge or accept us. So, there would always be the idea that i-imaginein mo, ano kayang iniisip ng mga taong ito about me? Okay? But, your answer to that question, kanino manggagaling? Sa ibang tao ba? Hindi manggagaling pa rin siya sa inyo. Alright? So, nag-iisip ka na, ini-imagine mo, nakaupo ka na doon, may panel, i-interviewin ka para sa selection process if makakapasok ka o hindi. And iniisip mo na, ano kayang iniisip nila about me? And your answer to that question would also come from of what you think about those people. So if you think that, oy, Mindanao Vegetarian publication, matatalino yung mga tao dyan, baka mga snobbish sila, right? So baka tingin nila sa akin, uy, baka maliit yung tingin nila sa akin, tingin nila hindi ako magaling, hindi ako deserving. Okay, so that is one judgment you have of yourself based on your judgment of the people looking at you, judging you. Okay? And then, you might look at it in a different way too. Uy, Mindanao Vegetarian, mga liberal yung tao, mga accepting. They are forward-thinking because they are in the business of publication. So you might think, uy, baka i-accept nila ako kahit ganito ako. They're open to whoever I am. So you feel positive that you will be accepted na kayang-kaya makakapasok ka. Do you see, class? And you don't even truly know what these people think about you. You just thought about what they thought of you based on what you think about them. So it's really an exercise of your assumptions. It's not an exercise of how people truly see you or perceive you. Okay? So is this healthy? Is this healthy? Of course, it's not. It could be faulty. Magkakaroon din ng false interpretation if you use this exercise to understand yourself. But the thing is, this is what we do, right? Whether in class and at home or with your friends, kahit sa bahay, this is common among teenagers actually. We always think that our parents don't care. You always think I'm no longer a teenager, but you always think that gusto lang naman ng nanay tatay ko matapos na ako paaralin, di ba? That they really don't care what I like. But that judgment also comes from the idea that you judge them. It did not come from them. It was just your assumption about them. Okay, let's work on that. On that idea that your parents do not understand you, that your parents do not appreciate you for who you are. Okay, so you try to imagine that you're imagining how your parents think of you. And we always do this. Kahit sabihin natin, bahala na yung parents ko, yung kanilang tingin about you is still very important and critical in your selfhood. So, one scenario would be, you try to imagine how your parents see you. And then you judge them, or you come up with the answer to how they see you based on your judgment of them. So if you judge them as parents who don't care, as parents who don't love you and accept you, or you know that they love you, but sometimes you doubt that they accept you and appreciate you, right? So if you have that assumption, you might come to the conclusion that you're not worth of love, that you're not worth of their support, and because you're not worth of their support, you're worthless as a person. And the thing is, after coming up with your assumed evaluation of other people, you internalize that. That becomes your identity. Okay? And that is not healthy. You assume that your parents think you of this way, and you accept that as it is, and you come and get it or include it in your identity. Of course, there are times when your assumptions are right, because our judgments of other people and how they perceive us is also based on feedback, based on how they treat us, based on how they relate and interact to us. Hindi naman siya completely imaginative lang. But the thing is, we're not really 100% absolutely sure that this is how they think of us. Do you get the problem with the looking glass self? You're looking into yourself only, and you're judging other people based on how you see them too. So, the judgment is also the root of that judgment, the core of that evaluation is still you. So we said that in the process of the looking glass self, it could let other issues arise, and it could be a source of faulty thinking, but it's still based on feedback and observation of other people, and it's also a proof that we play active roles in interpreting the perceived judgments and perceptions of others. We do not just accept and internalize how others view us, but actually we have a hand in our assumption of how others perceive us. Nanggaling pa rin yun sa atin. Therefore, we're still actively participating in viewing and creating, organizing our self-context based on our social context. Our self-concept based on our social context. So do you get that? Okay, because also we have this assumption that others judge us and perceive us, we also have the effort and consciousness to control and manipulate the impressions that we leave to others. So we tend to act a certain way to leave a certain impression to others. Okay, wag kayo kikiligin, pero very common to. If our love interests are crushes, but please do not spend your life focus on these kind of things, guys. Your feelings are impermanent, and choose halal all the time. Anyway, that is not our topic yet. What I'm trying to say is we try to control the impressions that we leave people. So, for example, by the grace of God, by the miracle of circumstances, naging classmate mo si class kahit iba kayo ng college. Okay? So, maybe in regular days, you dress up regularly, ordinarily. Okay? Yung tipong parang bumangon ka lang galing sa dorm mo and naalala mong may class. So, umasok ka sa class na naka-chinelas, naka-t-shirt, and naka-joggers. Okay? Pwede yun kasi diba? Kagigising mo lang. What's important is you're not late for class and you show up in class. But then, in this one class, let's say, Jack 101, by some miracle nga, naging classmate mo yung crush mo. Do you think you're still going to dress up the same way? No. You're going to dress up and prepare how you look, how you dress up, because you want to leave a good impression. Maybe you want to leave the impression that I take care of myself. You want to leave the impression that I am diligent in terms of my hygiene, so on and so forth. It would depend on how you want your crush to perceive you. It could also be that in other classes, you are outspoken, you are loud, and people know you for that. But because nga, classmate mo si crush, should Jack 101, you dare not speak a word because you're scared that he would find out or she would find out that you are loud and you don't want your crush seeing it that way. So again, it tells us that although we base our self-concepts on other people's views of us, we still manage to manipulate, control how people see us too. At the end of the day, it is you who determines and dictates how you see yourself. Okay, and this looking glass self was developed by Charles Cooley. It's quite similar to the symbolic interactionism too, in the thought that people play an active role in forming their selves or self-concepts in the context of their social worlds. Okay, next. All right. Now we have Dramaturgy by Irving Goffman. And this one is very easy to understand too. And it is very common among teenagers too to have this kind of thinking. According to Irving Goffman, individuals perform actions in everyday life as if they were performers on a stage. So Irving Goffman tells us that we are continually performing. Why are we performing? Because we want people to view us as a certain way, because we want to satisfy the roles that our social world had assigned to us, okay, and because we want to manage how we are viewed by other people. And Irving Goffman also came up with the concept of situated identity. Itself says that the self that can be identified with the role one is currently playing. Again, a proof that the self is multifaceted, meaning because we have different roles in various social settings, our performances are also different. But again, it doesn't mean that the self is not consistent. It just means that the self adjusts to what the role dictates. Okay? Similar to a theater actress or actor, or any actor in particular, we change, we adjust, we are flexible depending on the role that we play. We've given the example of the student, worker, employee, dancer, eldest child a while ago, and it's similar to this. His different roles ask him to play different characters, different versions of himself. And that is also the theory of Irving Goffman. But Irving Goffman added something else. Okay, aside from telling us that we are constantly performing in our daily lives to satisfy the demands of the roles that we have, Irving Goffman also said that our performances differ in terms of the setting that we are in. To be more exact, he said that the front stage as a setting is where we are in public. We are with other people. And in this setting, we do perform. Because as social beings, we tend to have this desire to satisfy what the role asks us, or what our social world tells us to do, tells us what should be in terms of the role that was assigned to us, that was given to us. And then the second setting, we have the backstage. It is our private lives, and there is no more acting in it. You try to take off the mask, you try to take off the costumes, the props that you have, and what is left is who you truly are. And there's really nothing wrong if there is a difference between your backstage and front stage selves, because who we are, or the level of showing who we truly are, could also depend on the level of comfort we have in the setting, and also depend on what the setting asks of us. Okay? So what I ask of you, class, now that you know that there is two settings in our lives, and the selves that we are in these two different settings could also be different, is that whenever we are in the front stage, we don't lose our genuineness and authenticity, and we still remain sincere in our actions. Okay, mm, don't be fake people wherein you do things just to get a temporarily and self-centered benefit. And in the backstage, I hope that you carry no ill intentions for anyone, and you carry yourself, you treat yourself with kindness and um, joy and gratefulness as well. If you have that, then that would be very good for you. Okay, the theory of dramaturgy by Irving Goffman again emphasizes the inseparable link between performer and audience. It is undeniable that as people, there is this level of pressure, there's this level of necessity to adjust ourselves depending on the roles that we have and depending who we are with as we do those roles. And again, it tells us that the individual is truly shaped by his social world, his society, and various levels in that society: intimate, personal, public, societal. So every level would have an effect on you. The previous theories that we mentioned were quite in the past. They were founded, introduced years ago. But now, as we enter a more modern and less traditional, more sophisticated, more liberal world, the concept of the self in relation to the social context also has changed drastically. So this is the postmodern self. According to Walter Truett Anderson, there are four postmodern concepts related to the self. So we have the multifrenia, meaning there are multiple influences that dictate who we are and what we are. We are in the era wherein everyone tells you that you can be anyone you want to be. But ironically, everyone also tells you you have to be this. Okay? And one perfect example, and I don't mean to offend anyone when I tell this, is the idea of the LGBTQIA plus. I'm not very sure if I got all of the inclusions in that label or in that movement. But the LGBTQIA plus basically tells us that anyone could be any person they want to be. They could be homosexual, they could be heterosexual, asexual, or pansexual, right? So that is the idea. You could be anyone you want to be. But also, there is this judgment if you refuse to accept their idea. You get criticized and bashed for saying that I don't believe, or my beliefs do not stand to the fact that we could be anyone who we want to be. Do you get it? They want you to accept that anyone could be anyone who want to be, but they cannot tolerate your beliefs in contradiction to them. That means they cannot accept who you are. Okay, so these are just examples how the multiple influences around us try to dictate who we are and what we are. And now, because the world is getting so small, globalization is fast and quick and subtle. There are so many things that people tell us to be. So it's very important to know who you are in a very intimate and personal level so that you would know or you would be able to choose what to influence you. to choose what is good for you. Okay? And then the second concept related to the postmodern self is a protean. Protean. Okay? It tells us that the self is constantly changing according to a multitude of social contexts. Again, because the world is getting small, the social settings are very diverse. You have the internet community, you have the community that you have at home, you have the community that you have in your locality, you have the community that you have in your fan clubs or in your hate clubs. There are so many communities, and there are so many settings, so many roles that are expected of you to satisfy. So there are so many you along those roles, and you're just constantly evolving. And not only the value settings that you are in, but now, because of the power of social media and because the world is getting smaller, influences are getting tighter. There's also the idea that you should evolve with time. You should evolve with the influences of time. And unfortunately, because time nowadays is very quick, change is happening rapidly, we're also changing so quickly. Even our ideals, even our values, which are core components of ourselves, are rapidly changing to the point that I myself am confused with what do people really stand for? What do we really fight for? Because it changes all the time. So again, know yourself. Know yourself before you let everybody else or anybody, for that matter, tell you who you are. And then we have the decentered self. Because again, we are constantly changing. I think we're also losing. Not me, not only I who thinks this way, but also Walter Anderson. We're really losing the sense of I. It's so malleable now, it's so fluid now, that it's so hard to grasp it and to preserve it. Okay, so you have to be strong, you have to be willful in terms of finding and keeping your sense of I, because this world is rapidly changing and it's also very suffocating, class. There will be so many people, institutions, ideologies that would tell you what's right, and they would sound all right. That's the problem with that. There is no more foundation of what is true in this day and age, that we just subject ourselves to what is available. And that is sad. That is really sad for me. Okay? But the postmodern self is also a self that exists in relation to other people. As I said, the world is getting smaller. So our circles are also getting wider, but also tighter. But you know what? What's funny in terms of the decentered self? There's also this sense of alienation and dehumanization. We're alienated from one another too, because you're so diverse to the point that our beliefs are so different from each other that it's quite hard to find a common ground nowadays. That's why people are constantly bashing each other, because there's no more anchor to make them hold on to one truth or similar truths at least. So this is the description of the common concepts related to the self. Okay, so don't forget. And it seems like from these descriptions that it's harder nowadays, despite the availability of options, despite the openness to accept who we are. But it seems like we're losing a very coherent sense of self. Okay? When we talk about the self and the society and the culture and how these three are interconnected, of course, we have to discuss the self in relation to our families. This family is the basic unit of society. It is the foundation of the society. And obviously, it is the first social group that a child interacts with. The child, based on his upbringing, based on his dialogue and interaction with his family, he learns the rules of life. He learns the boundaries between one person to another. He learns about morality, ethics, religion, and even politics and culture. He learns about the world in general. It's like the family is a microcosm of the entire system, social system that we have. So he learns the ways of living, and then from these interactions and learnings, he discovers himself. He realizes that he is separate from the rest of the family, that he is also self-contained and independent, that his ways of behaving are also consistent and other people's ways of behaving are also consistent, that his actions, thoughts, and feelings are in unity with himself, and most of all, that although he is in a social group, his self is also private because there are things that he only knows. So the basic ideas or characteristics of the self usually develops or becomes obvious to the child in the family, in his early years in the family. And most of the most enduring traits of the child usually comes from the family. How he responds to hurt, how he responds to criticism, how he relates, how he shares, how he heals, how he gets angry, how he treats another person. These are basically learned within the family, within the first few years of the child. That is why the family is very important. And the family would really influence your sense of self. A child born into a family of love would maybe have a different concept of the self from a family who is of a family that does not show love, right? And one of the things that a child learns in the family system is the concept of gender. I'm not talking about sex, biological sex, but gender. Gender is a social construct. And sometimes in traditional families, I'm not very sure, I'm not very sure if this is how you are in your homes, but in traditional families, certain roles and characteristics are attached to sons. Different roles and characteristics are attached to daughters. But nowadays, as gender becomes more fluid and the option of various genders also grows, these upbringing or traditional attachment or assignment of roles also tend to be more relaxed. Okay? But at the end of the day, the family is the one that teaches the child about his gender first. When we discuss the self in relation to society and culture, of course it is important to also discuss the self in the family. The family is the basic unit of society. At the same time, it is also the first social group that the child interacts with. It is where the child learns what is right and wrong. It is where the child learns to maneuver personal boundaries. It is where the child internalizes the expectations of of being, of living in this world. So it is also the first avenue that the child learns about his selfhood. Within the family, he realizes that he is distinct, he's different from other people. He also realized that although he is with a group of people, his thoughts, his feelings are to himself, therefore he's private. So basically, the basic characteristics of the self becomes clear to the child within the earlier years of his life with his family. One of the things that the child also learns within the family at a very young age is the concept of gender. The concept of gender nowadays is more fluid. The options for gender are also more varied. I'm talking about gender, which is a social construct. I'm not talking about biological sex, which is male and female. So the child basically learns about gender depending on the upbringing of the parents. Traditionally, there are separate tasks, expectations, ways of upbringing between daughters and sons. Sons are usually, traditionally, raised to be tough, while women are raised to be gentle, to be caring, while sons are raised to be assertive as well. So it really depends on the values that the families have, that if the family is traditional about gender roles. But at the end of the day, the child learns about his gender based on what is the culture within the family. Now we are in the last slide, and this is the gender and the self. And the gender is a very controversial topic nowadays. There is really no tolerance if you accept gender fluidity or not, or you accept gender fluidity or not, you're homophobic or not, you're pro pride or not. There's a lot of discussion attached to the concept or topic of gender. We will not deal with it now in this session, but we will in this class, inshallah. Basically, gender is the foci of the self that is subject to change and alteration, since it is a social construct, meaning you could be a woman, but gender-wise, you could be masculine, or you could be a male, but gender-wise, you could be feminine. Okay, I'm not talking about your sexual orientation, but I'm talking about your trait, whether masculine or feminine. And man and woman would have certain levels of femininity and masculinity. Okay? But nowadays, it's very important to give the person, the child, even as young as a child, the opportunity for gender expression and validation. The trend nowadays is to accept the child of what he thinks he is gender-wise. Okay? But at the end of the day, the gendered self is shaped within a particular context of time and space. Years ago, a man should be masculine, a woman should be feminine. The discrimination and specifications between those two are very rigid and very clear as well, very definitive. But nowadays, there is really no definite assignment of roles of what you should be gender-wise, in terms of being a male or female, masculine or feminine. The world has become more accepting of gender fluidity, but your gender would largely determine so many facets of yourself, who you are based on your orientation, sexual orientation, who you are based on your decisions, of your actions, your approaches in life. So gender and the self are very intertwined to one another. In fact, nowadays, if we fail to validate the chosen gender of a person, we also seem to prevent the person to express who he truly is himself. And that is a very widespread source of conflict, source of not only between two people but also within the person. So it's a discussion that needs um, more understanding, more tolerance, because our views about it would sometimes clash with one another. But regardless of where we stand in this topic on gender, it becomes undeniable, it is undeniable that your gender would largely determine your sense of self too. Okay, so that's it for the sociological perspectives on the self. Thank you so much for listening through the entire video. I'll see you in the next few days, and please read and prepare for the quiz when we get back.